Let's start with this Tucker Carlson and Sam Altman clip that's making its ways around the internet. And there's about a 90-second portion of it specifically that's really grabbing people's attention. And in it, Tucker's asking Sam about, hey, are you concerned at all about the big moral concerns, and things like that as it relates to AI? And Sam says, no, I'm not. I'm really more concerned about the details of how people are interacting with the models and thinking about all these things. So there's that. And then it's kind of pushed with a follow-up question of like, well, how do you govern or how do you decide what's right or what's wrong? And Sam says he kind of waffles on it. And then he goes, well, I guess probably just kind of how I grew up and what I saw in my life. And here's the thing. As you can imagine, people are going bonkers over it. And I do think it does reveal something about not just Sam Altman and OpenAI, but it's consistent with what I'm seeing throughout big tech right now that I think it is important for everyone to be aware of, because there's so much out there saying AI is magic. It's smarter than 1,000 PhDs. It knows everything. It's neutral, right? It's neutral. It just does, whatever. And this clip does highlight that that's not true. And not that, let's get mad about it or let's, ban open. No, that's not the right response. It's a matter of recognizing this is what we're dealing with. Okay, these are the waters we're swimming in. So OpenAI, the largest AI and probably arguably one of the most powerful AI models out there, and don't take that the wrong way, but you know what I mean, right? It's a big player, and it's being led by someone who really isn't all that concerned about the bigger outcomes, the bigger risks associated. He just wants to make sure it works functionally, in the weeds, which means that kind of big picture lens is not necessarily part of the focus, which that is why I am convinced we're seeing these risks pop up of like, oh no, people are like becoming dependent on it. Oh my gosh, people are being talked into doing these terrible things with AI. It's because those things aren't being considered on the front end. It's just like, well, let's just figure out how to make it work for people. And hopefully it should work itself out. And that honestly that's backwards thinking in terms of business strategy. Any good business leader would tell you, I certainly would hope they would tell you, that you start by saying, hey, we need to define the big picture and the big concerns and the big risks and our big guiding principles and make sure those are locked in place. And then we can focus on this. That, I think, is how you should approach something, especially something as big and impactful as ChatGPT. And to be fair, I know he never expected to do this. And I think this is also indicative of a technology and a business leader who got kind of rocketed into a position he really was ill prepared to handle. So this is not a, condemn Sam Altman. I think what we're seeing is just the reality of the way this whole thing played out. But I think we need to be aware of that. And first of all, one, if you don't agree that you need to have these kind of big guiding principles and frameworks, I would challenge you to re-examine that. Because if you don't have those things, you are literally shifting the tides in the seas based on whatever. Something bad happens and you move over there, or something, pops up here, you shift for that. And this is what we're seeing with OpenAI. It's a game of whack-a-mole. So one, recognizing this as a learning opportunity, of teachable moment, this clip revealed like, hey, if you are a business leader or you're looking at moving into leadership, this is how not to approach big corporate strategy. Creating a product that you want the world to use. You don't only focus on it, especially as the CEO. I think that was another thing that not concerned, but it was just a teachable moment from this is If you're the CEO and what you're losing sleep over is the nuance of the details of how people are interacting with your product, not that at the CEO level you don't care, but even the way he described it, it's clear he's still getting into those weeds and thinking about that and working on that instead of going, hey, I'm the leader of this organization. I need to be focused on these big macro guidelines and trends and things like that so that I can make sure we're steering the ship and avoiding icebergs. So I think this was very revealing in all of that. And something that we all, if you're a leader, if you're an organization who uses, if you're an individual who uses OpenAI, you need to recognize that that is not their primary concern. Now, does that mean you get rid of it? No, I still use OpenAI products, but it is important that you recognize that that's where it is, which means your personal responsibility, your due diligence needs to go up tenfold. And you need to recognize there's a good chance the model is actively working against whatever you think your best interests are. You may think it's trying to help you. Really, it's just trying to give you what you want or whatever Sam Altman's personal experience said was a good thing. Okay. So, which means you got to take everything, run it through that filter, and then go, okay, now how am I going to use this? That's just the reality. Now, one thing that was interesting was, his comment about his, ethical guidelines or what drives him coming largely from what he experienced and grew up around. I think some of the, criticism he's getting around that is unfair. We all like to think we don't do that. We're all independent thinkers. We're all critical. We're not influenced by our environment. We're objective in everything we do. We're all influenced by those things. So I actually appreciated Sam's humanity in saying, this is, I don't know, this is largely what shapes me. So I guess that's what's driving the show. I agree that we should be not concerned, but aware that, okay, that means there's not a real clear answer for what should we expect from this. And if you ask a specific question like, well, how are you training or what are your guidelines for AI on this topic? You're either going to get kind of a waffly, well, we aren't really putting them in, or you're going to get what Sam Altman thinks, what his personal take is based on his shared or his own independent experience. Again, does that mean you condemn it and, ban OpenAI? No, because the reality is nobody has your personal, standards, your set of values. They're all going to be influenced by their own environment. So to expect him to cater to yours specifically would be unreasonable. But as an individual or an organization, you need to recognize something I say consistently. OpenAI does not have your best interest in mind. It has its best interest in mind, as in, well, what do most people want? What do they think they need? What are, based on our own personal experiences, what are we going to build into it? That may at times be in direct conflict with you. And not that you can't work around it, not that you can't still use the tool, but then bend and filter it back through your own filters, but you have to do that intentionally. It's not going to do it on its own. Now, it was interesting because someone engaged with me on a thread that I was talking about this with, and they said, so what's your solution, Christopher? Are you proposing that, and they were taking the Tucker Carlson kind of political angle. They're like, so what are you saying? We import, conservative or religious values onto OpenAI. And for those of you who know my worldview, you may assume that I would say, yes, make OpenAI a, Christian AI tool. I actually don't feel that way. I don't think that's helpful. I don't think that is the way forward. And so I actually engaged with this gentleman and I said, no, I actually don't think what Tucker seems to be kind of implying Sam's answer should be is the right solution. And that may make some people angry. That may make some people, relieved. I don't know how you'll respond to that. But the reality is it's not about, and let me be clear. Do I think the Bible has the right clear answer for, how we should think about things. Yes, I'm not going to hide that. However, I recognize even my own interpretation of that, and you can't talk to 5 Christians and get the same answer. So to think there's this like one understanding that we can then import onto OpenAI is foolish, which is why I don't think it's about, well, let's make sure that we make OpenAI a Christian AI. No, what we need to do is actually say what we need is a standard. And that standard should be based on a diverse group of people who are coming from different perspectives, who are all committed to compromising, working together towards a solution that works for everybody, that everybody recognizes. Maybe not everything I want is in there, but it is representative of everyone who's part of that discussion. And I think that is more, and that was my conversation with this gentleman, was no, I don't think you need to turn OpenAI into a religious tool. I do think the fact that there's really no bedrock or anchor points or anything, that is concerning, because that means there's no foundation. It's literally a floating, ship. It's not even anchored down. And I think that's the risk. And so, would I have stronger opinions on what certain things would go in than maybe somebody else would, and differing opinions? Of course, we all do. We all have strong opinions and strong beliefs in certain things that we hold to, but we don't accomplish anything by trying to force that on everyone else. And so I think where I didn't agree with kind of where the conversation was leading was like, here, let's try and show how Sam Altman isn't importing our worldview into his product. I don't think that's necessarily the bad thing. I think what's concerning is there isn't a foundation. Because if somebody has a foundation, you at least can know, hey, do I agree with that foundation or not agree with that foundation? And so I can make decisions accordingly. With OpenAI not having a foundation, just kind of what Sam's experience is, you don't even really know how to make decisions with it, because you don't really even know what its point of view or its guiding principles are. And so I think that's an important lesson that every individual and business leader can take away from this example is, first of all, one, if you're trusting AI to make decisions because you think it has the right moral, ethical principles in place, there really even aren't any defined, which actually is more risky and more hard to work with than if at least they're defined and you go, I don't agree with them, but at least I know what they are, so I can engage in healthful discourse or dialogue about it, or I can just make sure that I'm making sure how I'm applying it takes that into account. That's it. We don't need to try and force a single mold onto OpenAI from anyone, because then all we're going to do is sit and fight, because we're never going to agree. Even people who think they're on the same side can't agree on anything. So it's a foolish task to try and import a single version of that and force OpenAI into it to then what? Force that on everybody else? It doesn't work. But what is lacking is this clear, here's where we stand, here's how this works, and here's the take that we're embedding and importing into OpenAI. So it's clear for everyone to know, it's clear for people to debate and discuss. It may be something we will be open to changing based on things like that, but it's clearly defined, and it's not. And so as you think about that as an individual or a business organization team leader, I think what you're seeing, some of the things you're seeing with OpenAI, some of the problems they're having, is a direct result of this. And this isn't just about worldview or AI tools. I'll give you a perfect practical example of where I see this go wrong all the time in organizations. You talk to most organizations, they'll tell you they have a leadership problem. We have a leadership problem. Our leaders aren't leading well. They don't lead. They don't, they're not great leaders. And if you tear that apart and go, okay, what is a good leader here? A lot of times you won't get you'll get some platitudes, some generic fluff, whatever. People will actually literally start arguing in the room over what a good leader is. and you kind of look around and go, okay, so you haven't defined what a good leader is. Have you even told your people what is expected of them or what good leadership looks like? Because if you haven't even defined it, what are you telling them? And then, you'll see some of the stuff they're doing, and it's just kind of like generic leadership stuff, kind of leaving everything up to whatever anybody's interpretation of that is. And then you wonder why you have a leadership problem. Well, there you go. And the same thing is true with what's happening with OpenAI. The same thing is true with every individual, every business, every leader. You have to clearly define, here's where we stand on things at the highest level. We recognize there's not lots of room for interpretation and application. We're not going to get into the weeds of a work instruction that goes through every single detail and every possible thing, but we're going to figure out what are the highest degrees of guidance that we need to have. And then we're going to clearly define what those look like, lay out the expectations for those. And then we're going to ensure and hold ourselves accountable to make sure that we don't cross those lines. Because if you don't have them, there are no lines. You don't know where you're moving. You don't know what direction you're going in. And I think ultimately that's what I walked away from the viral clip that many in the conversation don't seem to be focusing on. It's turned into a political argument over, Tucker and Sam's politics views. And it's like, that's not helpful. We need to focus on these other things because, again, you can't expect OpenAI to accommodate you. It's going to accommodate what it defines, and then you need to figure out how you work with that. So, if you've seen the clip, you can go ahead and watch it, but I just broke down what some of the biggest things are. And I think what some of the biggest things that are being missed from that conversation and what everybody can do with it. And if you're somebody who goes, boy, Christopher makes a good point. We're lacking this, whether it's leadership, whether it's our business strategy, whether it's what we're doing with AI. This is the work that I specialize in, is working with people, not to come in and import my sets of frameworks onto other people and go, okay, so I've decided this is what it is. Now you need to do the same. No, it's to work with people and go, let's figure out and define what this looks like for you. And I don't have to agree with them. There's lots of people I work with that I don't necessarily agree with, but I've helped them define, okay, well, I mean, this is where you're at. So let's make sure that's clear for you. And let's make sure that's clear for your people so that they can work in accordance with those guidelines or make decisions about whether they feel comfortable working within that, and then we can move forward with it.